The real event, a plane that goes down in the Gulf of Mexico, and yes, I will forever call that body of water the Gulf of Mexico, because to call it anything else would betray my personal morality and integrity. You call it what you want, and Google can go... Well, the event wasn't all that exciting. A guy rushes onto a plane in Tampa, Florida with a briefcase and no other luggage, something kind of odd back in the 1960s. The plane goes missing. The wreckage is found in the Gulf. Suspicions that a bomb was in that briefcase, but in the end the FBI decided that wasn't so. And because the FBI investigated the possible bombing of a plane, there were interviews and records which are available to peruse on the FBI website. And that's pretty cool if you want to know it, at least in my experience. Dozens of files and notes and interview transcripts just there for the perusing. That's where I happened upon the set of interviews that Mrs. Robert Spears made concerning her dead, yet not dead, husband. And it was through those interviews that I came to the conclusion that Mrs. Robert Spears was just as much a con artist as was her husband. She pretended that such was not so. She was the innocent wife of one of the most notorious con men of her time. She was the mother of his babies. She was a simple housewife following her man around. But that was all a facade. The woman knew very well what she married, and what she remained married to. Things seemed a lot less regulated back in the day, I guess. The entire naturopathy angle of the story, for example. Today, I think it might be just a little bit more difficult to pretend to be a doctor of naturopathy or a hypnotherapist and get people to fall for it. Oh dear. Several years ago, I fell very ill. I wasn't big on doctors. I'd grown up in the toxic American mindfuck of thinking that one could get by without going to the doctor. Doctors were expensive. You could end up in the poorhouse if something happened to you. Best to look for alternatives. Before I became ill, I had been pretty informed and self-educated in herbal treatments for common ailments. I've still got a dozen books that explain the beneficial plants that work better than medicine. And while living in the States, I simply didn't go to see doctors. But when I fell ill, I was no longer in the States. I was in Spain, where I currently live. Here, one can get medical attention without worry about how much it is going to cost you, because it is so-called social medicine. That is, working people pay a tax based on their income, matched by their employer, and actually the employer pays a bit more than the employee. That money goes to the government, who then distributes it to the social health system. I'd used this social health service once, a skin rash, but I was still suspicious of modern medicine. I still thought that doctors were simply educated middlemen for pharmaceutical companies. So I found a naturopath. I went to see him with my poor health. He talked to me about energies. He noted my symptoms. He gave me a massage with oil. He prescribed several herbal and vitamin pills. He sent me on my way. I didn't improve. My mate finally convinced me to use the social health service. Well, my mate actually took me in a near-death condition to the emergency room, and I spent the next 5 weeks in hospital getting cured of a nasty double pneumonia. Though it wasn't highlighted too much in my episode, nor in the FBI records of the investigations into Mrs. Robert Spears, she was practicing in pretty much the same way as that naturopath I had seen. They both had offices in their residences. They both pretended that what they were doing was going to be of use to the patient. Nothing the naturopath did helped me. I still ended up in hospital. Interviews of Mrs. Spears's patients also shed light on the fact that they also did not feel helped. She'd read a book on hypnotism and applied those tactics on her victims. She purchased some long-playing albums with sounds recorded. It was never very clear what those sounds were. She purchased a good sound system and headphones. She had her victims lay on that couch and listen to those sounds with the promise of helping them get their nervous conditions in order. What many of those victims say to the FBI agents leads one to think that conditions were not gotten in order. Finally, she tries to convince the agents that she was operating from a moral high ground. She indicates that she did not approve of her husband's manufacture and sale of a substance intended for use by other naturopaths and chiropractors in the practice of illegal abortions. She has told her husband several times that he needs to give that up. She indicates that she wasn't in accord with the insurance fraud her husband suggested she carry out. Yet, she went ahead and participated in the fraud, blaming her husband. Mrs. Robert Spears, which wasn't really his name, so her name was kind of a con as well. Well, she was as much of a con artist as her husband. Con man? Well, yes, Robert Spears was a convicted con man of special skill. Con woman? Hard to say. Frances didn't seem to be accused of anything officially. I couldn't find anything that indicated that she spent time behind bars. Maybe she convinced the FBI of her innocence. Maybe having 2 babies and being of a class of people who could afford to have 2 colored girls around the house got her off the hook. It was the husband they were after anyway, and he was put in jail. I found Frances's story interesting, but also kind of made up. As I read through her testimony, her interviews, and her signed statement, it read just like a damsel in distress kind of true crime story. Woman marries a criminal. She doesn't know he's a criminal, though he's been recently arrested twice for his part in illegal abortions. She gets caught up in another of his wild schemes, insurance fraud, maybe even murder, explosives, plane crashes, mortgages, and cashier checks. She's just an innocent mother of 2 babies, just a housewife in distress. That was her con. And she was pretty good at it as well. She got off scot-free. Please remember, check out the description below for links to this podcast episode on You're Listening to Radio Revel, the Keyhole Witness series, and transcripts of all of the things I say. Don't forget,
listen, like, subscribe, and share.
Cheers.